Chapter 8. Digital, mobile, and social media in sport. A couple definitions that your text gives here. And these are the learning objectives. Sport media content can be created, modified, viewed, and distributed through digital electronic platforms. Another definition, immediacy, instantaneousness, connectivity of internet are often best illustrated in the sport industry. So you catch the theme here? The idea is, I want it now. And that's kind of what drives digital media. I want my information now. I don't want to wait for it. It used to be that we had to wait for the newspaper. I know growing up, I used to grab the sports section before anything else. Now I don't, partly right now, because there just isn't that much going on that interests me. But you'll notice that we fit this concept within the whole process. You'll recognize this graphic from chapter 4 and the components of sport communication. Notice we have emerging in social media in sport. That's component 2, sport mass media. And primarily we look at the internet, social media, and then any other emerging technologies. You'll remember from, I know it was a quiz question, and it may have been on the exam as well, that NBC has paid X billion dollars for the Olympics through 2032. Anybody remember what the caveat to that contract is? Yeah, Mr. Hilliard.
I want to say was it 8 billion?
Well, it may have been 8 billion, but there was a comment. Yeah.
They own the streaming rights to even any new technology.
Any new technology, yeah, exactly. That's kind of that's probably the next thing coming out of your mouth. Regardless of what kind of technology comes up between now and then, like for example, if there was a way for, you to get, you have your personal satellite up there. Whatever it is that comes along, NBC still has the rights. And to violate those rights by some new technology would void the contract. Interestingly, they've done surveys, and back in '95, 14% of U.S. adults were on the internet. Now, I recall the very first thing I bought on the internet was Olympic tickets in '96. My wife and I went to the Atlanta Olympics, 2 days of track and field, and that's the very first thing that I recall buying online. That's kind of a big purchase for your very first thing. But back then, only 14% of adults were on the internet or using it. Five years later, in 2000, over half the U.S. adults, and then just by 2015, 90% of U.S. adults, 9 out of 10 adults, do something on the internet. Now that's staggering when you consider those kinds of numbers. Not in an academic setting. This is not a normal population for surveying that. Okay, because everybody's on in some way or other. But if we go out and survey the community, Columbus would not be really a sample population, simply because of the university, and not just Ohio State, but the other universities in Franklin County, that it's so highly populated by those who have come for education. But as we go across throughout Ohio, the farther you get out, the fewer. So anyhow, that's how we end up with those percentages, and 90% is pretty big. And then one thing, I find this really interesting, that your book suggested that online sport communication tends to eliminate or do away with gatekeepers. You remember the gatekeeper is a sports editor whose job it is to determine what sport reporting goes into the paper that day. Well, since we have online sport communication, that gatekeeper position is highly compromised. Now we can get any information we want. It is really mind-boggling that we can find any sport information. Here's an example of what I mean. 2 weeks ago, I met a prospective student, a senior in high school that's thinking of coming here. He goes to Johnstown High School, and I noticed on the information sheet I had, it mentioned that he had played basketball. And so I thought, well, let's look online and see if I can, because sometimes the best way to, and this could be a lesson to you as well. When you're in an interview, when you're trying to get a job, do your homework and find out something about the person or the organization when you interview. So anyhow, I went online, found out here's some pictures of this kid in the regional tournament. Here's some more information about him. Found out that he was on his school record for a sprint relay and track. And he was surprised that I said, hey, I saw that you were on this relay record. So you can find out pretty much anything you want. And the sport entities, the organizations, because of online sport communication, they can shape their own agenda instead of having the media shape it for them. Here's a couple of examples of what I mean. And we've looked at this example before. Your local paper will often, based on the gatekeeper, will often focus on a particular sport, maybe boys rather than girls, or more boys than girls, pro instead of college instead of pro. You see what's happening in that? They set the agenda for your reading. If it's not there and that's all you read, that's the information you're going to find out. I've mentioned this before. In Canton, the newspaper is a Canton repository, and it covers Canton and Alliance and Massillon and those areas. And it is, at least it was when I lived in Canton, it's invariably covering Canton, McKinley, and Massillon high schools. And that's where the Professional Football Hall of Fame is, and they cover these high schools a whole lot more than anything else. And sometimes it's aggravating, but then they're setting an agenda. That sells papers, okay? Here's another example. We see this in the newspaper and on TV, and it's especially interesting in regard to, I guess, after having the vice presidential debate last night. Anybody watch that? Okay, couple. Here's some examples that we see in TV and on their internet counterparts for setting agendas. Fox News. If you watch Fox News, you probably could attest to this. Fox News is very conservative. They'll often spin the news. Now, you may not like that word spin, but spin the news in favor of the Republican Party and Trump. They can do that by not covering other stuff. I'll admit that may be arguable. You may want to take issue with that, but that's what I see. The Columbus Dispatch, the newspaper, is on the other side. They're not conservative. Some would say they're on the left, that they're liberal, and they will every paper right now will include wire stories that point out false information that Trump gives in press briefings. They'll give you press releases on how many COVID cases there are right now. Everything to support the Democratic Party. That's what you get in the Columbus Dispatch. So if you follow either one of those, and that's all you follow, they're setting an agenda for you. Now we want to talk about sport in here, but you get the idea. So now I don't watch a lot of the talk sport on TV, but I do spend a little time, since I'm in the car quite a bit, the truck coming here. I'll listen to, in addition to NPR, I'll listen to 97.1 The Fan, which is talk radio. They've got an agenda. Not politically, but they've got an agenda that it's about Ohio State. And it's all Ohio State, except for when they talk about Blue Jackets. So if you don't want to hear about Ohio State, you don't listen to them. TV is still the most used medium by sports fans. And here's an interesting thing. Surveys suggest that TV fan viewers are not willing to pay extra for sport channels or online sports specialty streaming. And why do you think that is? You know, if you have cable, well, let me just pose that question. Anybody here pay extra for a extra sport station or anything like that? Or have you ever seen it, the opportunity, and would you do it? Pay-per-view, maybe? Maybe that's a little different animal. Well, here's my thought on it. If you have cable, even the very basic cable, I've alluded to my 98-year-old mother in here a few times. She's in assisted living, but she has a TV, and she pays basic cable, and get this, Spectrum gives them a real deal. I mean, she doesn't, all she has is the TV and the phone, and I pay $27 a month for her to have that. Now that's obviously, you know, way off the scale of Spectrum, but they do it for this assisted living home. Well, her normal cable channels, she has 1 million channels just with basic cable, as you do too. I mean, you can choose a package that is competitive, that includes the Big Ten channel, and probably a lot of other things that, you know, maybe the golf channel, a lot of other things that you would like to see. That's my thought as to why TV sports viewers are less willing to pay extra for sports-specific streaming. Any other thoughts on that? What do you get here on campus? Is it? I assume that you get cable in the dorm rooms. No? Can you pay for it? No cable? All Christian programming? What if you have a TV? How do you get reception?
You have to stream with like your own device.
Oh, okay. So like YouTube TV? Oh, all right. Well, based on that, you can get about anything you want then, right? Yes. What if you don't do that and you have it? Can you hook your TV up to anything?
Sometimes it's my apartment. Watch someone like hook up their computer to the TV and like you stream.
Yeah.
You stream the game
But other than that, there's, okay. All right, well, that's interesting. I guess that I'm based on, that's a cost saving for the university. That, now you do get, you don't have to pay for internet service here, do you? I mean, you plug in, don't you? Doesn't everybody have plenty of USB ports? Okay. In your text, on page 220, table 8.1, it lists the most popular U.S. sport websites, and it might surprise you to see what's in the top 5 there. Yahoo Sports, well, if you watch all these, maybe not, but ESPN, as you would guess, Bleacher Report, I was surprised at that, and CBS and NBC. Here's some statistics about the expanding user base. How it has expanded to some degree in terms of the number of adults living in the household. 97% of adults, 98% with a college degree, 100% of men and women between the ages of 18 and 29. That's an interesting statistic, considering the fact that that it is not a chosen, it's not a targeted public. It's the entire country, and so you'd have to have some really big pockets of total usage for that to happen. It doesn't surprise me that those with a college degree, because that's part of learning right now. I'm trying to think when, just as a point of reference for you, when this all came in, when it became a part of your college education. I first started teaching in '85, and I used some very, very low-tech computers for really nothing for class. It wasn't until the 2000s that I began to utilize the computer for teaching, and then not that much. I wasn't that skilled. I wasn't putting PowerPoints together until more like the middle 2000s, let's say, and it grew from there. So you all have been born into this is all pretty normal for you. My 8 and 9-year-old grandchildren they've seen it all already in terms of they're working with the computers and so forth. Online fantasy sport games. I polled you in here one time as to how many of you are involved in fantasy sport, and I remember there's a good percentage of you that are, and I was bowled over by not necessarily the amount of people that are active, 59.3 million. Maybe I should be, but the average, let's see, I'm not sure that I put the right statistic up there, or else I'll have it wrong in my notes. I remember reading, maybe you can correct me, that the average participant spends $653 a year. Now, I don't know how much you pay to be a participant, and maybe that includes money you put on the side, that like you have a group and everybody pitches in $20 and then the winner takes all. Maybe that includes that. It probably does. The DraftKings and FanDuel are the largest fantasy sports sites. Those focused on betting, with nearly $3 billion in entry fees. Now, consider that. Let's consider betting and gambling for just a minute. You know, very outset, looking at the mission of Mount Vernon Nazarene University, gambling is on that list. You know, and but looking beyond that, in terms of what about gambling? Is it something that, you know, like if you watched the recent Michael Jordan series, what was that called?
Last Dance.
Huh?
Last Dance.
Last Dance, thank you. One of the things he said in there was, you know, they questioned his gambling because he's lost tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more in gambling. And he said, look, it's not illegal and I enjoy doing it. You know, and what he didn't say is I have billions and I can afford to lose. I heard on the radio this morning that Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, who's the richest man in the world, and he has something like 600, I think this number is correct, 600,000 employees over the country. If he determined that he was going to give them a raise, each one of them a raise of like, I don't know, $180,000 or something like that, at the end, he would have the same amount of money that he started with. That's what we're talking about in terms of, now it's not gambling, I just thought I'd put all this in perspective. I thought, man, if he wanted to, so why doesn't he? Well, who knows? But coming back to the gambling thing, you all know, don't you, that there would not be gambling establishments if they did not make money? You understand it, don't you? You understand that you cannot win? Now, you may be a lucky winner. I had a friend who used to go to Vegas all the time, and a friend I was in college with, and one time he sent me a photo online of him standing next to the slot machine where he had just won $14,000. And I think that's his biggest take ever. He doesn't go anymore. But sometimes I would ask him after his trip, so how'd you do? Well, I broke even. And so he lost more than he won. And on the online stuff as well, you're going to lose more than you win. The model for sport communication, MOSC. You'll see that acronym in this chapter. The model for online sport communication. Now, I point out in this graphic, notice that this row represents the online needs of the consumer. That, in my opinion, is the most valuable or most informational component on that slide. What are the needs of the consumer? If you're putting together a sport information website, for example, for Alex, the sports information director, and by the way, I think he does a really nice job on the online material. That if you go to his website, comparing to other schools our size, I think he does a great job. But that's just a side commercial. He has to consider these needs of the consumer when he puts that together. Now there's some of these components some fall within like a subpoint, but what I'm going to talk about here are 7 components of this MOCS. And it doesn't necessarily fit with all these, but it does to some degree. You're going to find that some of them are subpoints, if that makes any sense. Level of involvement with the respective sport entity. These are if you are looking to put together a sport website, you have to consider the level of involvement if you've got nobody looking at your website, then, why are you doing it in the first place? What are the motives of the individuals, the participants? What do they want? This comes back to the needs. Are they mainly interested in performance? In other words, using that website for something? Certainly a gambling website would be like that. The content of the online media. Well, it should reflect positively on the organization. Tell me this, what would you do if you were the SID and your teams never won a game? What kind of content would you put on there? Any ideas? You're the SID of a losing program. That's not the case here, but what if you were? How would you?
You gotta keep it positive, kind of like, when you're talking about rebuilding process.
Rebuilding, okay, right, that's a good word, and that's, so you are looking for input, obviously, from the programs to insert that. Anything else that you would do? A losing program. Well, you don't want to lie, but you want to spin things in such a way that you still get some good out of it. For example, let's say that baseball is 2-20. Well, okay, you got to put the record down, but what if so and so is they hit for the cycle last game, or they have the highest batting percentage or slugging percentage, or you can emphasize stuff like that. One thing that Alex does that I've noticed is that every time there's a prospective student athlete recruited, he puts something on there about them. I think that's cool. Great, I just asked the question, since you're involved with that, I just asked the question, what if you had a losing program, which we don't, but you're the SID, how does that affect your content online if you've got a losing program? How can you attract people with it?
You have to make your content fun and come up with creative ways just to keep people engaged.
Oh, okay. Is that kind of a deflection from the record?
Kind of, maybe.
Okay. Kind of maybe a deflection, not emphasizing the record, but it's still a fun site to come to. And nobody's weeping about the losing record. Is it right for a sports information director? The reason I'm asking Braden is that he's an assistant in that office. Is it right to spin information in a way that sheds light, good, positive vibes?
Like you want to portray all the information as positive, but you still have to give like the straight up facts and tell it how it is, but then also you make your website look really nice and easy to navigate, and also add things that like make people appreciate the website and want to be on it more often.
Exactly. Those are great answers, and that's what they do here, and that's what you should, any website. Occasionally, I go to a couple of school websites we had a football coach at the last school I was at that left in not so dignified manner and ended up at this other particular school. And sometimes I'll go to that school's website. He's since left that school too. Have you ever gone to a college website and you click on a link and you'll get just kind of a blank square and it says we're working on this, or to be posted soon, or maybe it's last year's roster. It doesn't encourage you to come back at all. And the design obviously should influence you to come back. A lot of colleges probably within the relative size of Mount Vernon, will outsource a third party to set up their website for the college. Now, maybe that's done less than I think. I just know that years ago, at one of the schools I was at, in order to try to get off to a good start, and because they didn't have anybody within the college to put together a good website, they hired a third party. Well, what's wrong with that? I mean, you want to hire a pro, and supposedly, if they're in business, the problem is, it's like somebody else representing you, and it's like, hey, would you go tell so and so what I feel about that? And that's what we found was happening to some degree. And it's much better if you bring it in-house. Outsourcing is good to a certain degree. All right, so we've talked about the design, the content, the performance, the usability, your ability to navigate, to find things. I was with a student the other day. We were looking at college, university, graduate sport management programs. And in particular, we were looking for a program at Ohio State that was an MBA and maybe had some type of a specialization in sport management. So we navigated all around. I was doing the navigating on it, and it could be that they just don't have that. I know they have several MBA programs, but I couldn't find anything related to a specialization in sport management. Even when I went to the sport management, I couldn't find everything I wanted. Now, maybe it's because Ohio State is just so voluminous. Maybe that's part of the problem. I went to Ohio University, which boasts maybe the best combination master's MBA / sport management program in the country, and it was fairly easy to navigate, partly because that's what they feature, that's what they focus on in that particular department. It can't be any more frustrating than to be on a website and not be able to navigate the way you want. Here's an interesting dilemma. When you get to be 65